Scott, so we have large ground to cover here. I know we can't fit in all 60 years into one conversation, but to me, there's a defining line in the Stones sound, and that's basically, for me, pre-1989 and post-1989. I think each side can kind of get drilled down from there, but basically those are the two buckets for me. How do you see it?
That is the case. And there's some commonalities between 1981 and 1989 in terms of the length of show and the set list being kind of set more or less in stone, with some variations. But the post breakup, Mick getting back together with Keith, deciding to work, it's clear that in the relationship between them, the live product was going to change as far as Mick was concerned. And a lot of what you see in the 1989 tour was teed up and experimented on by Mick in his solo tours of Australia and Japan. Some of those arrangements and the incorporation of background vocalists. You know, if you look at Ruby Tuesday, for instance, the way it was performed in 1989, it was exactly the way Mick did that in 1988, I guess. Was that 88 when he toured? So the overall, detractors call it the Vegas era of the Stones. I don't see it that way. First of all, there's nothing necessarily wrong with Las Vegas productions. I mean, I know that's what they mean by it, is that the product is stiff and predictable and overly professional, not on the cutting edge of, we think of 1978 when they are on the brink of disaster. It could fall apart, but it can also be great. That's what people mean by Vegas. Like, maybe the product is very predictable and stable and good, but they're never going to wow you again with flying by the seat of their pants. The Stones are still, all you have to look at that Wiltern theater show that just came out. Tell me they're not on the brink of disaster in some of those.
Yeah, you're right.
In that performance.
You mentioned Mick's solo tour in '88, and I found it fascinating because I happened to take a look at it recently, and I was shocked that although the arrangements were locked in and tight, and like you said, eventually what we saw later, a year later with the Stones, but vocally, Mick was the Mick of, the 70s to me. Like, vocally, what he was doing in that tour was very loose and very Mick Jagger, and it's amazing. In the 1 year after that, he went through some kind of training. He kind of cleaned it all up, and he kind of matched the tight arrangement of the sound of the band with his vocal, also very tailored and very strict. I found that shocking. I didn't expect that.
I think, the way he physically takes care of his body, he has to treat his voice the same way, or you get no tour. Because it's a delicate thing, your vocal cords. And the fact that he's almost 81 and he does it twice a week, right? And he's very, very conservative with what he does with his voice. And that is just the reality. If he doesn't do that, you don't get a tour, or at least you don't get one that you can count on.
Right.
I mean, Bruce Springsteen, God love him, is really pushing it beyond the point that his body can endure. With the amount of dates he plays and the length of his show, he is every year having to postpone multiple dates because his body is breaking down. And that has only happened to Mick the one time with the heart valve surgery. Other than that, you can count on that guy to post like an athlete. He's like LeBron James. He keeps getting older, but he is able to post. And people take that for granted. They love to watch him run up and down the runway, the catwalk or whatever. But the fact that he can still sing and breathe is remarkable and not to be taken for granted. But Ronnie is still remarkably energetic.
He's still that puppy.
He really he kind of gets overlooked. And I think he, in these later years, we can get into everything being post 89. I think post 2012 is another milestone when they decided to get back together. Ronnie really does a lot of heavy lifting, and maybe doesn't get enough credit for that.
Yeah, you can totally sense that. At least for me, my perspective, it always felt like the Mick Ronnie dynamic was always such that Mick always saw Ronnie as, comic relief and always, the excited puppy dog of the band. And never, I don't want to say never took him seriously, but when it came to guitars, he always depended on Keith, and not necessarily relied on Ronnie. But like you say, 2012 and moving forward, Ronnie
that's changed.
Stepped up. He just said, you know what? Someone else has got to help out in many ways, not just the guitars. And you can tell Mick relies on him for cues, for just the whole direction of the song for some songs. So he's really come up the ranks, I think.
Yeah, because from like between 97 and 99, when Ronnie was really at loose ends, he was not the reliable and consistent one at all. And he has really turned his life around and become that guy, which is great. Just from a human being, from a human aspect, it's good to see.
Oh,
he
totally.
Seems like he's in a really good place and is very happy to be there, as he should be, because people talk about Keith still being here and still playing. Yeah. Ronnie also did a number on himself.
Sure. Wasn't the story he told that he burned a hole in his nose because of all the activities he was taking part in?
I don't know that detail, but I just know that in the 81, doing freebasing cocaine, which is basically like crack. And when Keith finds your behavior revolting, then things have gone too far.
Pump the brakes.
And Ivan Neville also got into crack. And Keith was like, dude, what are you doing? So I think that's like the line. there's a line.
Know your limits.
Powder and rock. That is the line that Keith draws.
Hey, everyone has their limits, and if you know yourself, good. As we're getting into Ronnie Wood, I guess that conjures up the thought of that was one of the many changes pre-89. From Brian Jones to Mick Taylor to Ronnie Wood. How do you fit all those different eras, especially when you listen back?
Well, I mean, the things that change. Look, there's a few buckets. There's technology changes, and I would include the way the PAs and amplifiers, amplification, all that changes. Then personnel changes, not just Mick Taylor, but having Ollie Brown and Billy Preston for a couple of years, and then Ian McLagan for a couple, and then the introduction of Chuck, then the introduction of background vocalists, and then those change. Blondie Chaplin comes in, and he's gone. Matt Clifford is there for a little while, for 89, and then he's gone. But then he comes back in 2012. And so technology changes, personnel changes, and then set list changes. So, and then the way the parts of the set list that don't change, they change themselves in the way that they sound from tour to tour. Like, you look at Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. I mean, I would consider everything before the 69 tour as being one era, roughly speaking, of the 20 to 30 minute, very brief show, poorly amplified, Screaming Girls, Riots, to 67, the tour of Europe, which is great, by the way.
Yeah,
Some of
I've
those
listened to
67
some of
shows,
those shows. They're really
you
great.
can really see, you can hear what they were gonna get to,
Yeah, totally.
and not quite there yet because they didn't have Mick Taylor and they didn't have big amps, those Ampeg SVTs. They didn't have those things yet.
Mm.
So I would say that's one bucket, and then 69 on, from 69 to 81 is that other era, and then 89 to 2012. I
Yep,
would say those. That's how I would bracket the eras. I don't know,
absolutely.
would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, totally. And even within that 69 to 81, 82, there are different variations in there. Because
Yeah,
like you say, any one of us could probably identify a version of a song based on those different things. But one thing is the same, is that there was a core sound, and there were different people coming in and out of it.
yeah,
And I don't know if that was something that bothered you at all. Is that at the very core of the Stones sound is that they will not, especially during these early years, they won't stay completely faithful to the studio recordings to get every nuance, every detail, every sound down. It was always
yeah,
an approximation. And Keith would say, well, you're not going to keep the same energy of the studio thing. It's going to grow into something else. And you saw that
yeah.
throughout, especially all those years.
I like that about them. That was one of my favorite things about them. And it was always something my dad pointed out to me. He was the one who turned me on to the band when I was a little kid. Basically, he's like, he's like, that studio version's cool, but man, you should hear it live. It takes on a new, different character, and sometimes in the arrangement itself, like Stray Cat Blues, the way it was recorded, and then the way they performed it on this in '69, it's like very, very different.
Yep.
And there was Stray Cat, the live version of '69 of Stray Cat Blues became Sweet Home Alabama. Like, I'm not kidding. It's got
Sure.
the deep
The
G
changes.
and the F
Yeah.
turnaround.
Right.
And there are a couple versions of, not the Yaya's version stuff, but there are other live versions of it where that DCG intro is even more Sweet Home Alabama-esque than it is on that live recording. Like, but I'm sure that's what they heard. Maybe who knows? But that is like a direct through line. So that's an example of a song still being alive.
Right.
And because of that vitality, still influencing people in different ways.
Do you participate in the Taylor versus Wood debates?
Sure, I get into that. I'm definitely, I guess I would classify myself as a Taylorite, but not in any way like I don't. The band would not exist. It would not have continued if Mick Taylor stayed with them, and it wouldn't have been his fault that they broke up. But I think Ronnie became the guy. I mean, if you've ever been in a band or in any human endeavor of that is a group of people, it could be a business.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting a business together. You have to have somebody in your group who you are happy to be around. And he may not be the best at his job, but he makes everybody feel good about being there. And there's always somebody like that, or there should be, in any successful enterprise. And
Right.
Ronnie Wood is that guy for the Rolling Stones.
Totally.
He is a funny guy who's always willing to subsume his ego for the greater good.
Yeah, and I love the way Bill German put it, because he realized when he got close to Ronnie that Ronnie had two older brothers growing up, so he was very much used to being that person in that dynamic of letting the two older brothers shine, and he would kind of support, and he does that beautifully.
Yeah, the story that Bill told you, I had never heard, where Ronnie had a promotional event for Slide on This, and then Keith shows up with Main Offender and basically just took over the whole event. That made my heart hurt a little bit.
I know.
Like, I like that he doesn't have a huge ego, but at some point you get trampled. And I don't like to hear that. That made me feel sad for Ronnie a little bit. Up to a point, because listen, Ronnie made a mess of things himself personally at numerous points over his life, and they could have fired him probably justifiably more than once.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the 2000s era with all that stuff.
Let alone 1981 when he was really, mixed up with some shady, dodgy people. But as a Taylor, right, going back to what you're saying, while Mick Taylor is a more skilled player, I have enjoyed, and increasingly I like the way Ronnie plays, and I like what he brought to the band in that era. Even that thing that leaked of the recording of Mixed Emotions and Rock in a Hard Place, down in Montserrat. I was going to say Barbados, but that was different. You can see Ronnie, like, Mick is trying to be all business. Keith is all over the place, just almost like ADHD kind of energy.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
And you would think that Ronnie would be like that along with Keith.
Right.
But he was like this buffer between Mick and Keith. And he's a very steadying presence.
Right.
And that throughout that, it was like 2 hours of footage. He was very steady. And he's like, he'll joke with Keith for a little while, but then he'll talk to Mick over here and be professional. It's like, back to what I'm saying, you need somebody like that who just holds it together.
And the cherry on top of this whole thing is that Ronnie was very instrumental in that late 80s thing to be the mediator, and then that brought us, in a way, very much back to where things should be, which is everyone together. He had a big hand in that.
Absolutely. And I like the energy he brought. Some Girls is a great album, and in no small part because of Ronnie. He brought a lot of energy to that album, and subsequently to Emotional Rescue. I mean, he really did kind of, and in the was it the Crossfire Hurricane documentary where they you don't see their faces while they're being interviewed, but it stops around late 70s.
Yeah.
And Mick says that it was the influence of Ronnie that they became more colorful, more produced, more fun on stage versus the dark, edgy, like, satanic. That I thought I had never heard that attributed to Ronnie at all. It would never have occurred to me that it was Ronnie driving that until I heard Mick say that just his presence made everything lighter and more fun and more colorful. And that is Ronnie. Ronnie is fun and colorful and light.
That's a testament to both Ronnie and Mick and Keith, because Mick and Keith could have easily, not been open to Ronnie's energy and let that influence the band. But they totally said, okay, where are we going next? Let's just feel this out. And Ronnie's energy was totally incorporated into their long-term plan, whether they were consciously making that decision or not. But they were all sponges off each other.
I think they were just like, let's go with this positive energy and follow it, and stick with that because it's more fun.
Right. Yeah.
It is fun. You can just tell the way he acts that he is fun. He's
exactly. A very important
And
role in any group is that role.
the world needs more of those people. Like, it's just fun to be around. Um, but like, as part of in this discussion we're having about the live sound, he changed quite a bit. Like in 75 and 76, his parts were very studied. Like, he was not,
Yes.
and I thought, like, technically, in a strange way, he was never better than he was immediately in 75. Like, he was reproducing some Mick Taylor
Yeah.
parts and playing solos on Angie, like that. He would, just from a technical standpoint, he never really got to that peak again that he did right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering why that was. I guess some of it could just be lifestyle and just general. Like the 1978, the difference between 75 and 76 to 78, they got rid of the percussion, the second line, and Billy Preston, and it was the punk rock era, and we're going balls to the wall. The playing got a little bit more sloppy, maybe by design. Like Jeff Beck has said that the Stones are designer sloppy. I thought was kind of well put.
Yeah.
Until 1989, when they were not designer sloppy anymore. It was. I like to think of it as being more professional. I mean, that is my favorite tour overall. I mean, this is going to sound blasphemous, but I think that they played at a level. They were never better as musicians than they were on that tour collectively.
Well, yeah, because I mean, Mick coming off his solo stuff, Keith coming off his solo stuff, they all had this new wealth of knowledge and wisdom just from those
And
few years of being
confidence.
by themselves, and confidence. And they all brought it in one place, and they were kind of explosive. But it's a very polarizing tour, that one, amongst fans. Because of you said the Vegas era, but there's a sound to that tour that's very specific to that tour that I think really rubs people the wrong way.
Yeah, I get it. It's well, it's kind of Matt Clifford's, the kind of, people always cite the fake harmonica on Miss You. And, I think of the sort of spacey synthesizer interlude of 2000 Light Years, and they do that psychedelic.
Sympathy.
Yes. That's very sort of slick. And, but I don't know. You listen to, and there's the background vocalists that make it sound a little more Vegas-y, for lack of a better term. But I don't have a problem with, like, you listen Midnight Rambler in Atlantic City, or the Tokyo show, Tokyo Dome, 1990, I guess that was, is phenomenal.
Yeah.
There's nothing necessarily slick. Like Midnight Rambler on that tour is not slick. It's the guitars are fantastic, and it's still improvisational from night to night. I mean, they're within a structure, but they don't play the exact same licks every one of those shows.
Yeah.
So that was the first tour I was able to go to as a fan. I was 13 years old, and then I saw the pay-per-view. I was under the illusion that every show going backwards was that good. And when I heard bootlegs from various tours, I was like, oh, actually, they had off nights. They were not always this good. So, and I guess, unlike some fans, I don't think that it's bad to be consistent. It makes me sound like Don Henley, God forbid. But you know how they get accused of being not cool, and he get years and years ago was very defensive. He's like, well, just because we want everything to be in tune, does that mean we're we're not punk rock enough because we want things to be in tune. Like, I kind of sympathize with Don Henley a little bit when he says that. There's nothing wrong with being in tune.
Right.
And those shows where Mick and Keith had to, like the Hyde Park. The Hyde Park show is a disaster.
Half of it is just tuning guitars.
Yes, that's not charming. That's not punk rock. That's not anything to aspire to.
Especially Mick, who so depends on the momentum of the show to just keep pushing. And then you've got
the LA Forum show where right before Jumpin' Jack Flash, Keith is tuning up, and it's taking so long that they actually start drumming a little bit and like doing a little. That's
the spilling of time.
That's not anything that they should be. We need to return to that energy where we're tuning for a minute, because that was cool.
One of the big things that also came from that change in 1989, which I think is still reeling today, which I think a lot rub people the wrong way as well, is now instead of unofficially Keith being the lead go-to, the general, the commander-in-chief, it kind of shifts over to Chuck Leavell taking the reins of that, and he's being kind of air traffic control. And I think that's also the biggest shift in the sound too.
Yeah, well, I think, yes, on certain numbers that he counts off, but the ones that Keith starts, he still starts them.
That's true, but I find that Charlie is now starting in '89 really following Chuck in terms of the rhythm, not only just cues, because that whole tour, you see Charlie, he's just dead aimed, locked in on Chuck. I mean, he's almost like a deer in headlights. He's like, oh, there's new rules on this tour, and Mick ordered me to keep an eye on Chuck. It looks that way to me, where he's like focused.
Well, I think that's because they had set arrangements that they didn't want to depart from, and where they could. But even within that, it wasn't always. Ronnie talked about this a little bit, I think, before the tour in '89, where he said, we're, for the first time, and he used the example of, you can't always get what you want. I'm going to have a set number of bars where I solo. And before, I would just go on and on. Like on the Love You Live recording, he does a very extended, you can't always get what you want solo, which is cool. But they're not doing that anymore. Now it's going to be you solo in here, in these brackets, and that's it. And Ronnie's like, I could keep soloing, but the band is going to move on to the next part. So, yeah, the arrangements became less improvisational for the most part. And Chuck was the guy they relied on to know when this part of the arrangement's coming, and Charlie would look to him for cues, for sure. But I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because I still think within those parameters that got more narrow, you could still make a statement, an improvisational statement. Like within Tumbling Dice, let's say, you could play that solo any number of different ways, which he did. The Start Me Up solo was different night to night. The Undercover of the Night, the Miss You solo for Ronnie. I'm just talking about from Ronnie's perspective.
Right.
Like, you have new marching orders here. You can't just meander and give us a cue when you decide you are finished. We're not doing that anymore. But within these parameters, you can still play whatever you want to play and be creative within that.
Totally. And to make one more pass at this point I tried to make, it's I think it's a good thing. First of all, I'll get back to that in a second. I also agree that I think this is for the best. But for me, when I listen to that era, those years, it just seems to me that Chuck was more prominent in Charlie's mix, because Charlie's playing is so much smoother and so effortless, where he can go into those changes very easily. And I personally believe it's because he can hear Chuck so gracefully guide him, as opposed to the herky-jerky thing of listening to Keith. We're like, oh, where is he going? What are we doing? And so, anyway, returning back to the point of why I think this is a good idea, I think at the end of the day, all these changes were necessary, because I can't imagine being Mick Jagger in front of that stage, in front of all those people with that big ass beautiful set, and you're in the middle of a train wreck. Like that had to stop. That had to stop.
Yeah. And I guess people, for whatever reason, they think that is some kind of a creative compromise, or a decline, a choice to be predictable. But one man's predictability is another man's professional consistency. So I don't have a problem with it. I'd still rather, just for length of show, the Steel Wheels tour was way low. Could you imagine a show of 27 songs?
Deep cuts too. Deep cuts.
Yes. From every era. You got something from Dirty Work and Undercover, for crying out loud, like every night. And as great as the 72 and 73, I mean, I love Mick Taylor's playing. How long was that show? Were they like 14 songs? Something like that?
So. About 90 minutes or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah.
An hour?
I don't know. I feel like the show at 19 songs in 2 hours now feels a little light to me. That's just an age thing there. But I mean, even Voodoo Lounge got cut back to 23 songs. I want to say. And I was in defense of the people who thought the 89 tour was a little too schmaltzy. They did pare things back in 94. They did send Matt Clifford away. They got rid of one of the female vocalists, went from 3 to 2. So they did pare things back. And they got a little more, I will say the big change from 89 to 94, the set list started to get more adventurous. Certainly when they decided to do the stripped thing, and they in Europe in 95, that was unbelievable. I remember getting the Beggar's Banquet newsletter in 95, in the mail. And when I saw those set lists that they had played at the Brixton, Paradiso, Amsterdam, Paris, and London, I was like, holy cow.
To die for.
Was that real? Did they really play those set lists?
Meet Me in the Bottom and Dead Flowers and yeah, yeah, right. And all that could not have happened, to your point, had it not been for the changes in 89 with having someone like Chuck say, okay, look, these are hard songs to play. You probably could not have done 2,000 Light Years from Home back in 69, 72. No. Now we can. And of course, the next big change from 89 to 94 is the loss of Bill Wyman in the band and Darryl Jones being in the band. That was a huge change. So now we're creating this framework that's kind of framing the Stones. It's Chuck and, to me, Darryl kind of helping the band stay in line, for all their songs in a way, especially the new ones that they don't know that well.
Yeah, and I really noticed, because I do think we miss Bill a lot. I can't think of anything memorable that Darryl does. But he's not really on the records. He's only on Voodoo Lounge for the most part.
And Don't Stop.
And he's on those tracks. He might be on one or two songs on Bigger Bang.
Maybe.
He's on somewhere on there, but not many of them. There's a lot of Mick on bass, as we know.
Dangerous Beauty.
Yes. Which I do like that song, but the bass line
terrible.
Is very predictable. It's something that a non-bass player would come up with. Right. Like I would. That's the bass line I would come up with.
Darryl,
yeah. But I remember being in the Brooklyn 2012 when they played Barclays Center. And I was on Keith's side, off to the side. I have a very good look at Keith and Darryl. And there's a lot of interplay. Like Keith really locks in with Darryl. Like just even it's just going over there to look at him. It's like, and Darryl will look at him like, I got you. I got you. Keith gets a little, it's not that he's lost. It's just like a, I don't want to say that Darryl's like a safety blanket, but he's like
a guiding light.
Like the floor underneath your feet. I can look over at Darryl and he's feeling good. So we have our own opinions on this side of the stage, but we have to honor what they feel up there. And it's very obvious that Chuck, Darryl bring a lot of continuity and stability to what they're trying, the product that they're delivering up there.
Right.
And that should not be taken for granted. That you can just, like, what would Bill Wyman look like? What would that look like at his age? I mean, I know he came back for the 2012, but did he bring anything? Did he bring any Bill Wyman energy?
Right.
I know he complained like he wanted to play longer, but I was like, and even Mick Taylor, those guys did not. So we have in our mind what Mick Taylor and Bill Wyman brought to the band in its classic period. And then when they actually come back, you realize that you're looking at things through a prism of nostalgia.
Right.
It's like, here they are, those same people and they are not themselves. Right. I mean, they are themselves, but they're not what they were. And we have to accept that what the band needs is what Darryl is now.
Exactly. Well, before we leave the Darryl topic, there is someone that has weighed in on the Darryl idea, and I'm going to share this with you, Scott. Hopefully, you can see this, but it's a little surprise.
Our old buddy Timo.
Our old boy. Let's see what he has to say about Darryl.
Darryl Jones, to me, is probably the prime example of a bassist who has the ability to blend in so well with a band like the Rolling Stones that listening to the band live, you wouldn't maybe even notice his playing at first. But if you were to turn off his amp during a live performance, you would immediately notice something so fundamental missing. And I think it's probably that which is one of the core ingredients of a great bassist, of a great rhythm section in general. But at the same time, maybe for drawing a bit of a line between him and Bill Wyman, he has also the ability to step out of that shadow of the passive part and get involved in some quite active interaction with the other players, which is usually a lot of fun to watch if a Ronnie Wood or Keith Richards, or in recent years even a Mick Jagger, is approaching him and do some call and response stuff, or just great locked in grooving interplay. That's just great and fun to watch, fun to hear. Yeah, and I think it's probably this perfect balance of playing a passive and active parts as well, which makes him my favorite choice for a live bassist for the Stones.
There you go, our old friend Timo Serbic.
Right.
Weighing in there, very smart and sharp thoughts there, and some of that echoes what you're saying. That's what the Stones need.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although I will say, I do think that Bill asserted himself, and he was in the same way that Charlie even said this about Bill, that you don't notice Bill until he stops, and the whole thing falls apart. Charlie said that about Bill, but there are live performances, I think, of When the Whip Comes Down. Yeah. Bill is like
all over
all over the place. And it's like a freight train. And it's and even like one of my favorite Bill Wyman moments on screen is in the movie Let's Spend the Night Together, where the camera is behind the band and looking out to the audience, and they're about to start Shattered. And Mick is doing shadooby,
right?
And Bill is lighting a cigarette. The song starts, and he's like, effortlessly, in no hurry,
just sinks in,
and light a cigarette. And as soon as he finishes with the cigarette and starts playing, it's like, bam, the whole thing just comes together and locks in. And you can hear it as well on the Get Your Ya-Ya's version of Midnight Rambler, where the intro of it is kind of taking a few seconds to lock in, and Bill stops for a couple bars, and it sounds really thin and empty, and then but when he comes back into the mix, it's like it's on now.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, that is the job of the bass player. Like, for non-musicians, just casual music fans, what does the bass player do? It's like, you don't notice it until it's not there, and the whole thing just falls apart.
Totally. And
something about where the bass lives down in that register. Like, a song doesn't necessarily, guitars live in the mid range, and you can kind of come in and out of the mix, but something about, if there's nothing underneath the mid range, you've got nothing.
Absolutely. I know. And each player brought their strengths, and I love that Keith later lamented that he noticed how much of a great bass player Wyman was. Like in the later 2000s, I guess, maybe listening to a lot of those re-releases and maybe a lot of those concerts they released, Keith may have had to revisited them, and he heard, oh wow, Wyman was really something. But like Timo says, all of them sort of interact more with Darryl on stage. It's incredible, especially Mick when he plays off him now on "Miss You." He really likes to have like a little thing between him and Darryl.
He's obviously a very steady presence musically and personally. I will admit, I don't love when he does step out for "Miss You." It sounds hard, like he plays hard. Whereas Bill, like I think I've said in another discussion with you, Bill, it's like he doesn't have fingers. It just feels very smooth. Whereas Darryl is a little more harsh. But that's more of a tonal observation than it is about his skill.
Right.
He's obviously, look at the guy's resume. He's obviously a very skilled and respected musician.
Absolutely. One of the other things that comes with the territory with 1989, and moving forward are, like you mentioned earlier, the backup singers. And that became a kind of a calming or focusing source for Mick. It's almost like that's his little army, is Bernard Fowler, Lisa Fisher, and to a degree later Blondie Chaplin. But really Bernard and Lisa, those are his two people he leans on. And I think that they provided a huge element during those years, and still does.
Just for Mick being able to count on somebody to sing up above him. Again, we've talked about this earlier. If Mick can't sing or he damages his voice, you don't get a show. Period. Date canceled, tour canceled. You don't get anything. Right. So and for Bernard is not a young man anymore. And he's done a very good job keeping his voice in shape.
Right.
Because when he gets to step out on Beast of Burden, sometimes in this post 2012 era, I guess maybe he did that before. I'm not sure. But anyway.
No, not really. No, it was just recently.
He can still really get up there and push his voice in a way that Mick couldn't even in his 50s and 60s, I don't think. Mick really can't. People are like, the way the angry sounds on this tour. I think I read somebody saying, well, he doesn't have the benefit of studio trickery. It's like, it's not that. It's not that he gets auto-tuned on the record. It's that when you're in a studio, you can push your voice for one or two lines, and then you can take a break. When you can come back tomorrow and finish it. And you can't sing that way for 2 hours. You can't risk singing that way for 2 hours and expect to do it again 4 nights later. I don't think you can do it at 80. I don't think you can do it at 40, to be honest. I mean, look at Have you
That's pretty
ever
smart.
look at Axl Rose? His voice is a disaster, an absolute disaster. I like Guns N' Roses, and I thought his voice, it was a unique instrument for its time. It's gone. Vince Neil, Motley Crue, his voice is gone. Disaster. Bruce Springsteen can still bring it. Like I think we talked about earlier, he is pushing it past the limit that his body wants it to go now. But he could still really do things with his voice. It's still impressive. But Mick, you can kind of, from 89 on, it's been a very slow and incremental decline for everybody.
Sure.
Just as you would expect in any human athlete. They're going to hit a peak, like a baseball player is going to hit the most home runs of his career in his late 20s and early 30s, and then he's going to drop off for the most part. There's like an aging curve. And I will say for the Stones, their aging curve has been pretty gentle, but it's going down. I found myself, I looked back at the 2012 shows and it's like, they don't quite have what they had then. And in 2012, I would have looked back at the Bigger Bang tour and been like, wow, they really they had more. I would have compared 2012 to 2005 and think there's a little, what I'm saying is from 89, I would, was a peak, in my opinion, in their physical, technical abilities. And there's been a slow, gentle decline since then. That's my opinion. I still think it's been great. It's been great for longer than any of their peers. I could not have imagined that it would have lasted this long. No way.